Welcome to the conclusion of a series entitled Defining Moments, and we're in the book of Esther this morning. Um, the date is 486 years before the coming of Christ. The place is Persia, which we know to be today to be Iran. And the Jews have gone through decades, centuries of persecution, which continues to this day. As you know, Israel is surrounded by countries that have sought to take them out throughout history. And yet, from the beginning of time, the Jews were selected as God's chosen people to illustrate His glory, His nature, His character to the rest of the world. They are now under the thumb of the Persian Empire, but the king has a kind spot towards the Jews. His name is Xerxes. The problem is he has a main leader, as we'll find out. We move through the narrative today, who doesn't like the Jews. And the story unfolds as we close this series around a man named Mordecai. Mordecai is a devout, God-fearing, loving man with a big heart. And here we are in Esther chapter 2. Mordecai had a cousin named Hadassah, whom he had brought up because she had neither father nor mother. In essence, he adopted her. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. When the king's order and edict had been proclaimed, many young women were brought to the citadel of Susa and put under the care of Haggai. Esther was taken to the king's palace and entrusted to Haggai, who had charge of the harem. She pleased him and won his favor. And now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. And so he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen. This promotion and platform would save generations of Jews. And as we unfold the story here, we study defining moments in the context of our own lives. Not all moments in our lives are created equal. When I had my first child, that was a moment. It was a greater moment for my wife. When I married my wife, that was a moment. When we built this church, that was a moment. There are moments that are special, and within moments there are specific times and turning points that occur. And if we don't make the pivot, we miss the perfect will of God. And in this series and in this story, we come to the conclusion by looking at the specificity of those pivots, 4 of them. Number 1, are you ready? Here we go. Defining moments occur when we think and act beyond ourselves. God never puts us on the planet just to take up space. All of us have a purpose, a calling, and a destiny. Mordecai had taken Esther as his own daughter when her father and mother died. He adopted and raised Esther as his own. Scripture puts a tremendously high honor, treasure, and premium on those who take care of the fatherless, the orphan, and the widow. In fact, the book of James says, religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. Now, this sacrifice of Mordecai was important because God responds, secondly, to selfless sacrifice by granting special favor. Sacrifice for God and favor from God are tied. They go together. The Bible says the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval. God put it in his heart. He is providential. He is sovereign. He put it in his heart to select Esther. The book of Proverbs, the book of wisdom, says, let love and faithfulness, 2 key words. Love is always unselfish, and faithfulness is always consistent. Let love and faithfulness never leave you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the table of your heart, and then you will win favor and a good name in the sight of God and man. Now consider this. Esther, history says, was 14 years of age when she was crowned queen. How many of you remember, ladies, when you were 14 years of age? Nobody. Listen, very few adolescent teenagers are of royal quality unless God puts his favor on you. God put his favor on Esther. This selection would be for a greater purpose. The Bible teaches that we make covenant and agreement with God not out of convenience or comfort, but always through sacrifice. Scripture says here in Psalm chapter 50, beginning in verse 4, he calls to the heavens above and to the earth that he may judge his people. And with this declaration, gather to me my faithful ones who made a covenant with me by sacrifice. Sacrifice is something we lose, we give up for a greater cause, but it hurts. It's a sense of loss, at least for the time being, but for the greater good. Now, this is a powerful moment in this story. However, let's go back to what I said in the beginning. While Xerxes, the king of Persia, had a sense of tolerance for the persecuted Jews, Haman, one of his right-hand men and top leaders, did not. He had a real issue with Esther's adopted father. Mordecai refused to bow down in obeisance and worship to Haman, who was a narcissistic egomaniac. Therefore, Haman took it personally. But Haman inside had a hatred for all Jews. And because he had the king's ear, he tricked the king into establishing a decree to annihilate all Jews in all the province of the empire of Persia, making the case that they were a threat to the kingdom because there were so many of them. The king of Persia, Xerxes, seals the decree, which is irreversible in Near Eastern culture. The Jews are in trouble. They are headed for mass genocide. They had gone through so much over centuries of history. Something must be done. Mordecai now knows why Esther was crowned queen. Because Esther has the inner relationship and the ear of the one person who can save her people, the king himself. Here is the problem. While he appeals to Esther to approach the king requesting that favor for clemency, she's afraid. Like any human being, much less a 14-year-old girl, she says, you realize that if I approach him uninvited and unsummoned, I could die. If he's in a bad mood, this is how it was, as weird and radical as it was, they would behead the person making the approach. What kind of kingdom law is that? You behead your wife, whom you crowned queen, but if you're not in a good mood, you just kill her and go next? Well, this was the risk. Mordecai continues to fatherly exhort Esther. Now, Esther's response teaches us this. Thirdly, God's special favor opens doors for divine opportunities. Anytime God gives us favor, it's for an opportunity that comes knocking for a greater good. Now, let's look at what happens. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer because he says she's a little afraid. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. So this is a total biblical fast. No food or water or jamba juice. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And listen to the confession of a 14-year-old teenager who has been wisely mentored by her adoptive father. She says, if I perish, I perish. Esther understands why she has this promotion. why she's been given this favor. It's for the larger purpose, for the salvation of her people. God's blessing, his platforms and promotions are never for personal gain and personal blessing. Not alone. While the Lord wants us to enjoy the fruit of that, there is always a larger purpose. And if you have the favor of God, the lesson we learn from Esther is, what beyond personal gain do I have this favor from God for? It may be a promotion. It may be a raise. It may be a relationship. It may be some kind of blessing pertinent and unique to you. The book of Esther teaches us to ask the bigger question, why, God, have I been blessed? They say that Bill Gates, when he was the richest man in the world in the 90s and the early 2000s, was approached by his father, who said to him, Bill, do you think that you have all this wealth for yourself and your wife and your family? Do you possibly think there could be a larger purpose? That conversation from an older father initiated the Gates Foundation, which resulted in Bill initially giving away 66% of his wealth. Not loan, give. In a next volley of time, he tried to give mostly all of it away. Since then, an amazing thing has occurred in that sacrifice to the fields of educating the young, healthcare, poverty, medicine, all of these realms. Recently, and you may have heard of it, Bill Gates, again, is the richest man in the world. How did that happen? It's the same question we ask is, how did the University of Hawaii back into a Mountain West championship game? How did this happen? At the end of the service today, Pastor Paris may tell you how that happened. You can't outgive God. God blessed his investments. God blessed the preparation he made for his future. And he replaced Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, as the richest man in the world. If you study Jeff Bezos and you study Bill and Melinda Gates, you will find that they have very different set of character makeup. And I'll leave it at that. Bill Gates literally gave himself back into the top position. The laws of the kingdom never fail. See, Bill Gates grasped the larger picture. And recently, he was on the Global Leadership Summit, which educates Christian leaders worldwide. I ask you to ask God, why am I here? Why do I have what I have? Why have I been blessed? Why have I been given success? Why have I been promoted? Why do I have that beautiful wife that I have? Why do I have that hunk of a husband that I have? Why do I have these wonderful children that I have? Why am I in this awesome church? Is that enough for you? That's a lot of chicken YYs in there, man. All right. Now, she has to respond. And she has to do so in a timely moment. So she makes her approach to the king knowing she may not come out alive. And maybe this is how it looked like. 14 years old. Take a look.
Unsummoned she comes before the king. She does. protocol not broken?
Yes, protocol has been broken down.
Persian lore, the extending of the scepter was the granting of mercy and grace, that the queen could ask of her king anything and he would listen. And so Esther, of course, makes a radical request for another decree. But her example teaches us the following, and this is where we close today. Seizing divine opportunities often involve loving sacrifice, something that costs, urgent purpose, and a timely response. Because some things in divine moments that frame our lives must be done at a certain time. There's a statute of limitations that occurs. When God opens windows, sometimes we can't just walk through them. We need to leap through them. In our walk of faith, God will require us sometimes to take a leap of faith. There are those dramatic moments. This was the dramatic moment because the decree to annihilate all the Jews in the province of Persia, which essentially ruled the world at that time, the then known world, that genocide was about to trigger. Esther had to go, and she had to go immediately. And there's some things in our lives we have to go immediately. And it takes faith and a trust in God to do so, a timely response. So let's look at what happened. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves. The initial edict could not be reversed. A new edict, countering the initial one, has to be initiated. By now, the king understands he's been tricked by a jealous conspirator in his own court to his displeasure. But what he could do was establish another decree that countered the first. So let's go on. They could now destroy, kill, and annihilate the armed men of any nationality or province who might attack them and their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. The Jews assembled in their cities in all the provinces of King Xerxes to attack those who determined to destroy them. No one could stand against them because the people of all the other nationalities were afraid of them, and countless lives were saved. History tells us that over 2 days, the Jews who could now weaponize and defend themselves slaughtered tens of thousands of their attackers. Understand, the Jews were hated. They were marginalized, offscouring, and outcast, historic renegades in the eyes of most civilizations. And the Persians, who were proud, they had conquered the Babylonians, who had held the Israelis hostage for 70 years, had a very dim view of the Jews. But never anger a Jewish person. They educate the world today on how to combat terrorism because they have lived in terror all of their lives, a tiny country surrounded in the Middle East by everybody who for all of history has wanted to take them out. And these are God's chosen people with the law and the covenants and the gospel bequeathed to them. God has chosen them from the beginning to illustrate His glory, His ways, His character, and His nature to the rest of the world. And at the end of the day, The return of Christ will center around this tiny country in the Near East. If you want to know about where the world is in the prophetic time plot of God, keep track of Israel and world events. It is an astounding little country with an incredible future that will set the rest of us up. Esther set everybody up because it was her divining moment. But without Mordecai adopting her and raising her and teaching her, there would never be the legendary legacy that would ensue. History tells us they weaponized themselves and they were so fierce, people were afraid of them. Generations were preserved, the future was saved, and history could ensue such that today we actually have a nation called Israel on the planet. Mordecai adopts a 14-year-old, oh no, she was smaller, raised her to be a 14-year-old queen. Not all moments are the same. And I look at all of us here today in the narrative of our story, where are we? Well, we're going to pick on one person who is an interesting narrative himself. You know him very well, and he's going to join me on the platform shortly. Here he is. Let's watch.
I grew up in a pretty healthy family environment. I never felt like I was a second-class child. Felt loved, felt like I was part of the family. But as a young child, coming into my middle school, high school years, I would hear small comments from different people at Grace Bible Church Honolulu mention the possibility of me being adopted. You hear rumors of me only being able to speak Japanese as a kid. And in my college years, I had a conversation with my mom and asked her, am I adopted? And at that point, she said, no, I'm your mom, you're my son. And so I took it at her word, didn't think too much about it. But it wasn't until I had a conversation with Twinkle, she talked to my mom and she was mentioning to her about the possibility of us adopting if we couldn't have natural kids. Since last year we lost our child. And my mom made a comment to her, well, I didn't do that bad. Fast forward to the afternoon after my father passed away, felt like this was an opportunity to have a conversation about adoption again with my mom. And at that point, she revealed to me that, yes, you're adopted. They couldn't have any more kids and they wanted a boy. So they started seeking adoption agencies, and a missionary couple just heard about that, and they were representing an adoption agency. They said, hey, we have this boy from Japan. And so my parents, my dad and my mom, pursued that, and here I am because of that. I mean, there have been moments since I've heard the news that, where are my biological parents? Why was I an orphan? Why was I given up for adoption? But sometimes in life, you trust God. And I look at my life and I see God work in my life every step of the journey. And yeah.
He's our senior associate pastor that has helped shaped the journey of this church. Will you welcome with great honor a great friend, Pastor Paris Hayashi. Pastor Paris was the first person I saw when I first came to the Lord. I had hair down to here, like some of you women. I was a drummer in Waikiki, and I would sneak into the back of the church, sitting in that corner, equivalent of hiding. Okay, I'm not saying you're hiding, all right? But I'm just saying I just didn't want to be noticed, which is weird because I smelled like smoke and I looked different from everybody else who looked like they had come out of the Marines with their haircuts. And a 4-year-old boy was peering over the chair or the pew, staring at me. He had thick coat glasses, and he could only speak fluent Japanese. And I thought, what an odd introduction to church life. Well, recently, and very recently, your father passed away. 92 years of age. He lived a full life. He's Mordecai. And what I loved about your father, because I've had conversations with him, um, he served his country. He served in battle. He was interned. He saw life differently than most of us would because he saw suffering and pain. He saw what war does probably to children. My uncle was that way. What moved him to stay focused in World War II as part of the 442 was he would look at the children. I cannot help but think, Pastor Paris, that your mother and father had the same view that Mordecai did. And I just think that probably they didn't want to hurt your feelings, risk rejection, so they never told you. We've had this conversation because I would hear the rumors over the years, and I've asked him because I said, you are my right-hand man. Look, I have a master's in counseling. This could be traumatic. And I would say, Pastor, I said, Paris, I hear things, are you adopted? And he would look at me, he says, no, I'm not. Then I'd hear things. So recently, I said, Paris, I think you should ask one more time because I have one more person who told me they were there. I went, either they're lying or something's happening here. And I left it at that. And the day after your father passes to be with Jesus comes the disclosure. This is pretty amazing stuff, okay? Because the conversations I would have with your father was always at children's camps, school camps, youth camps, and college camps. He did all the cooking. He cooked for the airlines. He had another life. He was amazing with knives. A cook, top level. And so he loved young people. Obviously, he adopted you. You've carried that legacy on. And I'm going to give them a snapshot into your journey. My view of Paris after the 4-year-old Coke bottle glasses episodes, you were a cook for many camps. You helped the late Mark Tawarahara, member of our church, his family, Abby, Joey, Danny. You cooked so much chicken and steak and ribs and stuff for young people. My visions of you were deboning children. I feel like you were deboning children children. Chicken. Maybe we should put the 7:30 on videocast. We don't want to be deboning children.
That's a good soundbite.
Okay, sorry, Masa. Deboning chicken forever. That's one of my pictures of you. Then you've directed these camps, numerous camps. You planted a campus ministry that turned into a church on Arizona State University, who beat Oregon, by the way, yesterday, the largest campus at that time in America. You were an educator. If that's not enough, it's like you took a dad's legacy and mom's legacy, and then you became an educator. You've taught elementary school, middle school, and high school music. Then, if that's not enough, you went and took out that incredible athletic genes that you have, and you coached volleyball, girls and boys, volleyball and basketball at Farrington High School, where the kids are in a rough community called Kalihi. I think your dad would say, well done. I think, well done. And then you've helped me form this church, who's now known with a prophetic assignment of serving the larger community by adopting the next generation and making a place for them. Now, when you see all of this, because this is really recent, man, this is quite a disclosure. I have an adopted sister. As a 10-year-old boy, I went through training about what you say, what you don't say, and it was scripted when my parents will tell my sister when she was adopted. This is, as a 10-year-old kid, my eyes were bugging out of my head like, it's pressure. And then this is a different story. What is your reflection now that you know?
I think at 50 years old, as I reflect on the revelation, I'm actually grateful because I don't know if I would have had the emotional fortitude and the maturity to handle the news if I was 10, 20, or 30. Now, being much older, having that conversation with my mom, having her reveal it to me, having her share the truth actually has helped me realize how God has worked in and through my life all these years. I had a conversation with her about 3 days ago now, and she said, "How are you doing?" I said, "I'm doing fine."
Hmm.
And let me just say this, Mom. I looked her in the eye and said, "Mom, I love you. My love for you and Dad would not have changed if I had known earlier, and it does not change now. I would still love you as my parents, as my mom and dad." And it's been an interesting journey, and I do reflect on moments of questions. Where are my biological parents? I have to make sure I don't play the mind games of trying to make up stuff and the what ifs of life. You know, where did I come from? Who are my parents? Where are they now? Yeah, I don't want to go down that road. But I do appreciate the truth being revealed to me, and I do appreciate the love that my parents demonstrated throughout all of my years.
Are you and Twinkle thinking of adopting? Because that's what that said.
Um, 2018 was a difficult, challenging year for us because we lost our child, and I'm getting older, and so I want to be able to have children, and so I can run and play with them. And so, about 2 months ago, we started the conversation. Actually, a few months before that, we started a conversation of the possibility of fostering. And then all of a sudden, that conversation of fostering went up to a whole new level of adopting. And so 2 months ago, I was telling Pastor Norman earlier that my wife wants to be an aspiring architect. And so she had a vision and she drew out this home that had a central gathering hub, a master wing, but also the central piece, the centerpiece of it all was a kids' wing with multiple rooms, with bunk beds, bathrooms, restrooms, a play area to house not only biological kids, but in the future to foster kids and to adopt kids. And so that's been our dream in our heart.
See it for me, like we've been talking together, how when you leave just being too close to the weeds and you pull back and try to see the larger picture from God's prophetic perspective, you can see a narrative and a script being written out in your story and in Twinkle's story. Something I throw in here, I didn't know, Twinkle, that your father, who you loved dearly, passed on Valentine's Day. And all of these things, as painful as they seem, um, will play into your future. I know this. I'm not Jim LaFoon, the prophet, but I sense very clearly that God is providentially writing a story for your best, finest, and greatest days, and will encompass adopting a whole new generation of people. Um, I would assume then that you came from Japan, hence the fluent. Can you still speak fluent Japanese?
Unfortunately, not. I have sushi, teriyaki, ohio gozaimasu, and that's it.
And Twinkle is from Manila, right? So a Japanese meets Filipino, creating an adoption home. You are now you're going to become Mordecai like your father was, and Esther's will come to you. This church gets that opportunity as we pivot into the next 25 years. Pastor Paris, parting shot. I mean, from your heart.
Several things. November being a month of gratefulness and thankfulness, I'm thankful for my parents taking that risk and opening up their home and their heart to adopt me. And I'm so thankful to the Lord that I was adopted by Christian parents, raised in a Christian home to be trained and to become a godly man. I'm so grateful for that opportunity. I don't even want to think or imagine where I would be if I wasn't in a Christian home. But also in life, many of us, if not all of us, will face challenges and situations and storms in our life that are out of our control. But God sees and looks at our heart and our response when we face those storms and those challenges, and how we respond to Him in sacrifice, in obedience, will determine really how He gets all of the glory. And I want to say this as a parting shot. God is calling all of us, and I want to encourage all of us. Pearlside has a great call
to really reach the next generation. And I look at my father, mother, who adopted me. I want to ask us as a Pearlside church to adopt the next generation. And whatever that means to you, I pray that the Holy Spirit would speak to you on what your role, your place could be in reaching the next generation so that we could leave a lasting legacy for them.
One thing I know, I think, funny, your parents adopted a boy because they only had girls. They wanted a son. My parents wanted a girl. They had me. I was supposed to be Carol, okay? I know how special that is. Your parents went across the ocean into another culture. My parents reached into Kali House, Camforth housing, and you make a place first in your heart. I remember every interview I went through as the social services prepared me to receive who would be my sister. And it's a lot of sacrifice for the parents to take. First of all, you have to make a place in the heart. Then you make a place in your home. And what we're doing with this youth outreach community center is we're making a place in our home for the next generation. We've worked with young people all of our lives, and we know the statistics. Young people from broken families, and Pastor Billy Lyle, who today is preaching in Taiwan, Taipei, in our church there, had a challenging upbringing. He would have been a statistic were it not for the church adopting him. William is with us now, and William's part of a team that's adopting those from broken homes. We get to do this together. And you say, one way we can sacrifice is to think generously like a Bill Gates towards making a house for people before they get into trouble. We are educated and taught that unless you reach people young when they're formable, it's hard to rehab and reform them when they're older. And the Lord's given us a unique assignment. Pastor Paris is actually in charge of the build-out as he was of this house that we call Pearlside. Now we're adding an 18,000 square foot home, $109,000 just about now has come in even in advance of the kickoff offering that comes next week and throughout December. Pastor Paris, Twinkle, may God bless you with many Esthers to come. And guess what? We get to be a part of that together.